welcome to Research Support Sessions, brought to you by the National Institute of Health and Care Research, Research Support Service, or NIHR RSS for short. This is hopefully the first edition of what will be our regular series to discuss and learn all things in the world of research support, from innovative research designs and funding opportunities to behind-the-scenes information from research funding panels. I'm Gareth O'Brien. I'm Operational Director of the Research Support Service delivered by Imperial College and Partners. And today I've got the pleasure of being joined by Dr Anna Volkmer, a speech and language therapist, NIHR Advanced Fellow, and Deputy Chair of the NIHR Team Science panel, an all-round research superstar. Hi, Anna.
Hi there. Thank you for having me. That was a very generous introduction.
Welcome. So today we're going to be discussing the NIHR Team Science programme. This programme is particularly close to my heart as I was involved with the design with it, and it's designed to support research teams to collaborate on a future application to other research programmes, expand the research network and develop research capacity in priority themes. Does that sound right to you, Anna?
That absolutely sounds perfect.
Great. So let's get started with some questions. So for you in your position as Deputy Chair and as with experience of the programme, how would you summarise the Team Science programme to people who don't know anything about it?
Yeah, so Team Science is a grant award which you can apply for £100,000. But a key component of the Team Science is in the name, does what it says on the tin. We want people to apply as a team. And the award is about creating teams, fostering team work, developing team ideas to address a scientific issue. And so what's really important in any award application is that the integral within the application is tasks, activities, methodologies that will foster that team nature, as well as addressing the research question. We kind of see it as, I guess, in many cases, a way of developing a team that will then go on to do more research and apply for more grants and applications. Does that make sense?
It does, totally. So I noted that the theme for the current round is applied health and social care methodology. Do you know why that is?
Well, I think it's a really important area. It really focuses on bringing health and social care professionals together with researchers, or bringing health and social care researchers into the foreground and honing teams that are going to address research that is as close as possible to real life, right? So it's about doing things, research methodologies that are actually investigating how research and science and ideas can change health and social care itself. Does that make sense? So look, I think we're particularly interested and in things that are about outcome measurement and implementation, and those kind of really applied focuses. Because, and I think with my personal hat on, I have been a clinician for 14 years, nearly 15 years before I came into academic worlds. And as a clinician, often you read about research and it's really hard to enact it or use it, or the research hasn't taken into account the real world of, let's say, the NHS. And so actually delivering, say, an intervention in an NHS setting is often not feasible for various reasons, or the interventions that have been researched perhaps are not addressing the needs of people themselves, that the main issues that they're worried about. And we know that often there's then this, I often get cited, there's this like 15-year gap between research and change in practice. So I think personally, I feel that's a really important element of this round, is that we're trying to encourage people to create research, good science that addresses some of these barriers.
Yeah, I've heard anecdotally as well that methodologists sometimes feel on the outside of research as they're sort of brought in to help with design, and then someone who is sort of clinically or academic minded takes that research and does the thing. So it's really great to see them being included in like the entire process.
Absolutely. I agree. I completely agree. I hear that often as well, that and I think that's the nature of the team, that it puts the methodologists as well as the healthcare professionals, as well as the research, the entire research team on an equal footing, bringing equal skills to this kind of important work.
So I see that the program's aimed towards newly formed teams. So can you talk to me about what that means and maybe provide an example of potentially what it looks like?
Yes, absolutely. And I think so. In last round, we had a very specific definition of a newly formed team, and which had to have been formed within 6 months of the application. So this year we're a bit more flexible with that, but what we want to see evidence of is that people have come together and specifically to put together this application. What we want to do is support new teams to come together. Like you were saying, actually often methodologists perhaps are they're sidelined, and so teams are led by certain individuals. So what we want to do is bring individuals together to form new teams. So what we want to avoid is teams that are really well established, where what I've just described has happened heaps before. We don't want teams who've been have had one leader, have applied for loads of grants in the past, and that leader has continued leading them. We want to create a team that then actually goes out to develop their team approaches, their team dynamics, their team management in a way that fosters good science. So that gives you an idea. So it's really what we will be looking for in applications is evidence of how the team is formed. So we want people to tell us that story, that narrative. So how did you meet? Why did you come together? And how have you come up with this idea? And actually the initial, Team Science is based on 2 events throughout the year. So we have the Team Science Award, the £100,000 grant. But before that, we have a Team Science Camp. So this is a new grant, the Team Science grant. So this is only our 2nd year, but both years that science camp has happened in the autumn. And the idea is that individuals can apply to that camp, and we brought people together into teams and they come to the camp, and the camp's led by one of the NIHR collaborators. I believe it's Capfinity who've run it in the past, and they work with the people who come to that camp on to think about how teams work, how teams operate, and they get this opportunity to actually meet other people, to actually foster relationships and grow new teams. And what we found is that from those team camp events, we are then seeing teams applying for this. So I think we have a large proportion of teams formed at the camp who then are able to put forward their applications into the actual Team Science Award application, which is exactly what we're hoping. Obviously, there are teams outside of that come together organically, of course, so I think we probably have not perhaps an equal distribution. I think more or less maybe of people who come of teams from Team Camp and outside teams who've kind of organically arrived.
I suppose that's like the developing capacity element of it, rather than giving sort of a development grant to an established team who are likely further along in their development process. But like, what a really cool opportunity to actually provide sort of structured team development time, rather than putting the onus on the team itself to just figure out what team development is, especially a new team.
Exactly. And I know you were such a key part of developing Team Science, and I know that's where it came from, right? It came from this you were that's right, isn't it, that you were you were really inspired by that element as well, to build capacity.
I thought it was such an amazing opportunity to do something different, because a lot of research done in teams is sort of led by the great and good of people who need a team around them to deliver the thing that they've always quested after. So they might already have a large grant, or certainly be in the process of developing a competitive grant submission. Whereas the thing that was missing for me was that like development space, purely focused on what makes a team effective, so that you can sort of put a little bit more emphasis on maybe providing a bit more assurance on that end product that you're talking about, that sort of translation into changing practice or implementing a new intervention or whatever it might be. So yeah, I loved the development process of the program, like bringing people together and thinking about how we could constructively get people to apply as a solo person but end up as part of a fully functioning team after a really short period of time and be able to apply for a development grant.
And I guess what you're describing, and I think that is a key part of this award, is that it's about fostering that in building capacity, not in senior researchers with loads and loads of experience, but in people who haven't been able to do that in the past. So lots of ECRs, ECRs, lots of early career researchers. All the acronyms in research always get me. Lots of ECRs. So we foreground ECRs in that we are really keen to see those in the applications. And I know that's something that you've talked to me about being passionate about, I think, trying to increase capacity in ECRs, increase capacity in ECRs and teams of ECRs. So it's not just the same people leading the same things.
I think it's a nod to like the culture of academics a little bit wider, like just getting people recognition earlier on, because it's sometimes the recognition that means that they can transition to the next stage of the career.
And opportunity. If you don't have the opportunity to build your capabilities, and then you're never actually gonna get to the next stage of your career, are you? It's I think it's key, because I often find in research and academic circles that a lot of the requirements to move on to a senior investigator level or principal investigator level or professor level, they're all about having proven that you can run a team, or that you can be part of a team, that you can get money, and often you don't have those actual opportunities. I think the beautiful thing about team science is it's much more equitable, and it's about the team getting the money, not one single person.
Quite a bit of influence we had to do around the named lead applicant and things like that when we first put together the program, to try and, as you say, like make it equitable, flatten that like hierarchy that's sort of exists within academia. So with this being an NIHR program, there'll be quite strong expectations around things like people and communities, patient and public involvement, and research inclusion. So do you want to talk about those in the context of team science?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's actually having a PPI, a patient and public involvement representative on that team, is something we are looking for in every single team. So teams that don't have that representation within their teams, so, equalizing that power so that those people with lived experience are actually a core part of that team. Unless that's happening, those teams aren't really making the cut, I'd say. So what happens is that in the application forms, there is quite a large section on PPI work. So we're interested in not only the work that's planned in terms of the PPI work that will happen within the team, but we're also interested in how PPI informed the application itself. So, and I think that is a general NIHR and perhaps a general move in research that we must, in order to do science and research that actually is helpful, useful and meaningful, we have to do it with people, not to people, right? So that means thinking of an idea with people. And I think that's actually, in previous years, we didn't see that in all applications. I think that's a really core ingredient. And we have PPI members on the panel of when we're interviewing the teams. And when we see a team, so when they're coming to interviews, all members of the team or several members of the team are invited to attend. And personally, I think it's really, really important that that PPI person is somehow representative, whether that's in person or through videos. That is so that voice is foregrounded to help us really understand how the ideas have developed. And I think that's, that's flexible. As a speech and language therapist, I'm mindful that lots of the people I work with, it'd be their absolute worst nightmare with this, if they've got a speech and language difficulty, that they would want to stand in front of a panel. I know it's hard for everybody, but that would be even harder for somebody with a communication difficulty. But there are other ways of building in and enabling people to participate in the interview and showing that that's part of your application process. I think this is actually a key opportunity. Something like an outcome, if outcome measures are the focus of the, for example, project that someone has proposed in relation to health and social care methodology, then actually there are actually loads of ways, structures, methodologies around doing co-development for outcome in terms of outcome measures. So I'm hoping to see lots of that in this next round. I'm really looking forward to it.
I'm optimistic that you'll see that too. I agree that in the last 5 to 10 years, patient public involvement has become increasingly important to NIHR, but also a recognition of what is good is changing, and the trajectory is always up. So I'm really optimistic, and I hope that all of the people bring their public contributor along to interviews, given how powerful that message can be when they're in the room. Which is actually a lovely segue into the next question. So when you're in that room or when you're assessing the applications that have come through, what does the panel look for in successful applications as well as that public involvement?
Yeah, so I think that, there's lots of elements, isn't it, to an application. And I think PPI is a huge element, and it's got to be not just on paper, not just about how the PPI has informed your ideas and what PPI is going to happen. It's about having the PPI member in the room represented on slides. Then it's also about how, for example, there's how you're going to embed team science. I think coming back to the very first question you asked, I think it's really important that as a funding panel, the successful applications put as much effort into explaining how they were going to foster team science within their teams. So what they were, and I mean quite literally what they were going to do, not just saying where they were going to do it, but what were they actually going to do, what activities were they going to do, who were they going to get to help them do that, were they going to use a specific methodology, were they going to have weekends away, were they going to have training, were they going to mentor people, there had to be actually a real focus on exactly how that was going to happen in their application and also in their presentation. So in the at the interviews, everybody had the opportunity to do a presentation as well as answer questions, and that had to be equal weighted, and then addressing the project. And that had to be interwoven. So some of the best applications were able to interweave their approaches to their team with how they were going to develop their research agenda and idea. And so that they weren't just completely one person was going to do the project and the others were just going to get together and hang out. It had to be how was the project going to kind of come out of the work that you were doing to develop yourself as a team? And then where would that team go? Of course, that's a really important component, that we weren't interested in investing in teams that were going to do a discrete piece of work. We were interested in investing in teams for the long term, that people could show what they were planning to do. And I think that's probably a good description of the application process. The other thing, interestingly, to mention is this idea of the lead and the host institution. So I think perhaps this is quite a novel application or grant award, because it's a team applying, but you still had to have a lead person and the money was held by a host institution. And I think what we also saw is that we needed to see that had been thought through carefully, and that had been so that wasn't an afterthought. Because I think, as you're saying, perhaps at the beginning of or in the start of this conversation, is that often actually that dictates, the lead researcher and the host institution kind of dictate a lot of things otherwise. And so we needed to see investments from host institutions, or that the team had invested in thinking about the right host institution. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah, it totally does. And it's really great to see that sort of thought being applied to not just a tokenistic gesture to who might be the best host on paper, like what actually is the benefits, pros and cons, and why is this host the most appropriate for this particular team.
Yeah, exactly. And so we were often really encouraged when the hosts weren't the most obvious hosts, like the most powerful university, or it was actually the host who could support the early career researcher the best, or the host who was in the area of the country where they could advantage the project the best. So it was, and that's all fine. And that latter point is probably as important. You know, there was a lot of projects, and we haven't talked about EDI, equality and diversity, but it's probably worth mentioning that across, I think it's really important in research that people take into account representativeness. And so just being at I mean, I'm biased, I'm in London, but just being at a London university because it's big isn't the right reason to be at a London university. If the research project was about about a community outside of London, or a group of people, or a health need that covers people across the country, we needed to see how the host could support that.
A lot of sense. Is there any other things about equality, diversity and inclusion that you think have been really important at the programme, or really important in terms of the makeup of the team and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I do, actually. I think that what we found was we wanted teams, and I think it overlapped with the patient and public involvement element. So what we wanted were patient and public involvement contributors who were representative of a range of people who might. So if the project was focused on a health condition, then you might, I don't know, let's take, for example, diabetes. We needed to reflect the community of people who live with diabetes, but we also were, sticking with PPI, that meant we wanted to show that you weren't just going to consult one person, that you were actually going to go into a range of settings to have some representativeness, and that it wouldn't just be one person from a highly educated background, that you might seek out people from different economic and educational backgrounds as well, and linguistic and cultural backgrounds, and urban and non-urban backgrounds, and that had to be, and an effort had been made to either think about that on the research team as well, or say why that hadn't been addressed on the research team. I think that's worth noting. It's not always feasible to include that representation on your research team, but actually saying how you plan to, or why that's a problem. So, I'm mindful in the research area I work in, that in rare dementias, that the people who are most likely diagnosed with rare dementias are from predominantly English-speaking, white, upper middle class areas. But that's not what rare dementias. They don't just affect those populations. So we need to build in work to address where are these other people and how you're going to reach them, even if that's not the key focus of your research. And I think unless that's incorporated into any application, we certainly had lots of discussions about that. So there needs to be some thought given. It cannot be overlooked.
I really think that's quite an important distinction to make, the idea of trying your very best to do it, but then B, justifying why sometimes trying your best makes it impossible given the community that you're working with or given the researchers that you've got access to. So that makes a lot of sense. I'm interested, obviously, it wouldn't be a research support service hosted session without me sticking a research support service question in there. So if you were an RSS advisor, if you were advising someone who was applying to the Team Science program, alongside the stuff that you said already, which takes out a lot of the key messages, what sort of advice would you give them in crafting a more competitive application?
I think I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to start with the interview. And I think the things that really stood out for me were well-planned interviews. They make or break you. And you need, because it's a group interview, slightly different perhaps to research interviews that people are used to. So not only would I suggest perhaps the same type of advice one might give, which is have really clear slides, make them really catchy images, make sure there's key messages on them, but plan how the team is going to speak. So we don't just, to really evidence that somebody is working as part of a team, we don't just want one person speaking. That's a really simple ingredient. Share through the team how you're going to talk to slides for the presentation element. Share through the team how you are going to allocate questions, and demonstrate in that interview that you are a collaborative group, and that the team isn't, so some interviews it was one person spoke the entire time or one person fielded all the questions, which didn't instill confidence in that team element. It's a very simple thing. And then the other thing to say, perhaps looking more, I've talked about the balance within the application form. I think that's really important. So things that I would stress are good use of subheadings. Something really simple. Make your good use of bolding in an application form to show this is the project, this is the team science bit, this is the project plan, this is the team science plan, this is the actions we're going to take, so that you're really foregrounding both the team science bits and the projects. In terms of the project, I perhaps haven't spoken heaps about the project. And I think being mindful, it's £100,000, and some of that money must be allocated to team science activity. We don't want to see all the money allocated to the project activity. Some money must be split. Then that means that we're not looking for projects that look like a huge, I don't know, something that might sit better in an RFPB or in a personal grant or a fellowship award. We're looking for things that are at the beginning of their life. They're a discrete piece of work that are going to inform the next stage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think just a really, really interesting behavioral observation, right? Like, you can be the best team on paper, but then if you interview one person stands and talks for the entire time, I can see how that would immediately create sort of a disparate image of the team from the one that you've read about on paper. So I think that interview tip is probably going to be really well received by teams who might consider applying for this scheme in future.
That's good. That absolutely. I think that's some really simple things. I'm mindful of having too much information on a slide immediately. It's hard to follow, and that equitable kind of allocation of talk, and making sure people speak. It's really, some of the stuff I think is perhaps so obvious that it's silly to say, but making sure that everybody speaks clearly, and not so although one person might be leading the application, I think that there's a risk of then always deferring to the lead, and so allocating people perhaps expertise and roles is a good way of conveying that.
You said sort of team science activity for the team, so something team development.
Yeah.
Got any examples of what that might be alongside the more obvious stuff like training sessions or whatever?
Yeah, I think there was some people some of the nicest, so there is research on team science approaches. So I'd actually, really concrete things like tell us, like reference a methodology for team development and team activities. There are references you can find that around that systemic leadership work done to enhance the value of a team, and perhaps think about novel, like some of the stuff people was really interesting was novel things like, are you going to use a novel way, not just we're going to have a weekend away together, but what are you going to do on that? What novel way are you going to get together? And it wasn't always like the total sciencey aspect. It was some of the things were more about activities it was actually describing concretely some of the activities that people were going to use, but it had to then also include things like, I think people don't realize that things like mentoring and making clear statements about we're going to support some of the perhaps master students into PhDs, we're going to support PhDs into postdocs, making statements about mentorship and supervision.
Yeah, cool. Very cool. So this is sort of my final question about team science, but obviously you've got a role on the panel and you've seen one round now and you're approaching the second round. So after that experience, and obviously you'll practice some team science stuff in the way that you conduct yourself out with your role as there. So what does team science mean to you?
Well, that's a really good question. So as I mentioned before, I'm from a speech and language therapy background, and I was inspired to do research from having worked with people with dementia and their family members for whom I was trying to deliver services and there wasn't enough research evidence. And they were asking for me to help them with their conversations, and the research was all about learning single words. So for me, team science means it's probably very much in the PPI domain, that we work with people such as people with lived experience and the people around them, those communities of people affected, to, do good science that improves the health and well-being of those people. For me, that's where the team starts. That's the very foundation of the team. And then on top of that, I think it's understanding that it's about power and equality for me. I think for me, it's about saying there isn't one person who knows what's best. What we need to do is we need the person who's affected, and then we need people who have research methods expertise. We need people who have more medical expertise. We need people who are fantastic at stats. We need people with fantastic in qualitative research methods. We need people so we need people to come together on an equal footing where all these skills are equally valued to deliver research. But that's perhaps my socialist politics that influence my feelings about research as well. That I think that we will make the most meaningful, and I mean that in terms of real change to health and social care, by developing teams where there's equal power and equal balance.
A positive note to end this particular edition on. So I'm going to finish by saying thank you very much, Anna, for sharing your time and your story and your reflections on team science with us. And then say thank you very much for everyone for watching this episode of Research Support Sessions. As a reminder, the NIHR Research Support Service provides free and confidential support to people to develop competitive applications to national peer-reviewed programs. That includes funding from the NIHR, as well as other big funders, including the Wellcome Trust and charities. You can find out more by scanning the QR code on the screen now, and you can also sign up to our mailing list for news, updates, training, and events. And with that, we will see you next time. Thanks for watching.
Thank you. Thanks, Gareth.